All right, so now we want to take a look at these approaches to value. And y'all, we talked about it a little bit earlier, but as you see here, y'all, there are actually three different approaches to value that an appraiser can and will use. And y'all, you'll see as we go through, if the appraiser can use all three, then they will. Now, you can't use all three approaches on every single property, y'all, because it depends on the type of property, the purpose, what you're trying to do. All of this has a lot to do with which approach or which approaches we will use, okay? But anyway, see them listed here. Y'all, first one is the sales comparison approach. And y'all, and as you see here on the slide, and hopefully in your book as well, y'all, this is the most useful approach for a broker to assist the seller in determining the sales price. Y'all, this is the one that we're going to typically use as real estate agents. Y'all, the sales comparison approach. And I will tell you that probably good information to remember for test purposes. Y'all, I know they do like to ask, y'all, which of the following approaches to value is the most useful for a real estate agent or a real estate broker to assist the seller in determining the sales price. Obviously, that's going to be the sales comparison approach. But then we've got the income approach, and then obviously that will be used for income producing properties. You know, if it's not an income producing property, it's probably not, this is not going to be the best approach. Now, you can probably still use it, but through making some assumptions and whatnot. But typically, you only want to use this approach if it's an income producing property, like a rental house or something like that. And then there's the cost approach. And I will tell you, this is probably the least preferred approach to value. Because with the cost approach, we're really dealing more with, in fact, almost exclusively more with price than we are with value. We still look at it. It is something that will be considered. But again, it's just not the preferred or best approach when we're trying to figure out the value of a property. But y'all, sometimes there's no way to compare. There's nothing to compare this property to. And we'll talk more about it as we get to it. But if there are no comparables, then obviously sales comparison is useless. If it's not income producing, that's not going to help you. The income approach won't be any use to you. So in a case, in rare situations like that, really the only thing left is the cost approach. Then, what would it cost to build this property or build this house or whatever it is you're appraising? All right, so we're going to start out looking at the sales comparison approach. And I will just tell you, like a lot of the stuff we talk about in this course, this is certainly going to be one big one. But a lot of what you're going to learn is obviously just the basics here. But you're going to have to perfect what we're going over here through experience. Okay? You're just going to have to gain experience. You got to get your license, get out there, start practicing. And the more you do what we're about to go over, the better you're going to be. So how does this sales comparison work? Well, again, if I've got my subject property, the subject being the property I'm trying to or thinking about selling, trying to figure out how much could we possibly sell it for. That's my subject property. I'd like to find 3 or 4 or more, but I'd say at least 3. But obviously the more the better typically. But at least 3 similar properties in the same location that have recently sold. And again, if I can say, for example, find 3 properties in the same location, maybe in the same subdivision or whatever, that have recently sold, then y'all, that should give me a really good idea what you could expect your subject property to sell for. But here's where you got to be careful here. Y'all, even though we may find 3 other properties that have recently sold, and again, they are similar, y'all, there's a difference between being similar and identical, right? Y'all, just for example, y'all, say your subject house has 3 bathrooms, but another comparable property that has recently sold, very similar, however, it only has 2 bathrooms. Okay, well then you can't expect the comparable that sold with 2 bathrooms, y'all, assuming all else is equal, then you would have to think the subject property would have to be worth at least a little bit more than the comparable, because it has more. Y'all, it's got a 3rd bath. Comparable only has 2. Or y'all, it could be vice versa, right? So what we would have to do at this point, and we have to do this with all 3 comparables, once we find the 3 comps that again are similar, now we have to go and identify what are all the differences between this comparable property and the subject property. You might want to just write them down. 3 bathrooms versus 2 bathrooms. One's got 2,200 square feet. The other one's got 2,300 square feet. One house has primarily carpet throughout. The other one's got hardwood floors. One house has a fireplace. The other one does not. One house has a 2-car garage. The other house has a 1-car garage, or maybe no garage. So my point is, we're going to have to identify what are all the differences between the comparable property and the subject. And then we're going to have to adjust for those differences. We may have to add a little bit for some. We may have to subtract a little bit for some. We're going to talk about how to do that and when to add versus when to subtract, and we'll just go from there. But you've got to make these adjustments. You're going to be way off on your analysis if you don't learn how to make adjustments. If you just take that similar house and say, well, it sold for $275,000, and because it's similar, you're going to assume my subject property is worth $275,000. You could be tens of thousands of dollars off. You could be potentially $100,000 off. Because you have to make the right adjustments. You can't just go with what these comps sold for, and you certainly can't just take whatever the comps are and determine what the average of all 3 of the sales prices were. I'm telling you, it's just not going to work if you do not learn how to make adjustments. We're going to take a look at this here in just a second, but you got to make adjustments. But some other things in addition to just the physical characteristics you may have to adjust for. Again, the time of sale. Again, even though I've got a good comparable here that's recently sold, but that might have been 5 months ago. Well, what was the market doing 5 months ago? Especially when it comes to supply and demand, right? When that property sold, were there the same number of properties already on the market as what you're dealing with today 5 months later? And if it's not, you're going to have to make an adjustment for that, right? Were you more in a buyer's market 5 months ago? And if so, are you still in a buyer's market today? You got to take a look at that, because all that's going to matter. Location is a big deal. You might, now obviously, preferably, the easiest houses to value, if you will, would be houses that are all in the same subdivision. That would be good. But I will tell you, there are some subdivisions where, maybe not so much. Y'all, you can have some neighborhoods that have 2,000 or parts of the neighborhood that have 2,000 square foot homes. Then you got another section of neighborhood that's got 3,000 square foot homes. And then maybe in another area of the same subdivision or neighborhood, you got 4,000 square foot homes. Y'all, I live in a neighborhood like that. Y'all, there's one road that goes into it, goes back a couple of miles probably. But y'all, in the first part of the neighborhood, y'all, you really have around $200,000 homes. You get about halfway back, y'all, you'll find there are about $300,000 homes. Maybe $400,000 homes. But y'all, all the way towards the very back, y'all, you actually have a few homes that might be getting close to $1 million. So y'all, that's a tough neighborhood. Now, most subdivisions typically have very similar properties throughout. Y'all, that's the one you want. That's the easiest ones for sure when it comes to trying to determine the value. We have to take into account sales concessions. Y'all, that's a big deal right there. So what are we talking about sales concessions? Well, say for example, one of your comparables, yeah, it sold for $275,000, but we also find through research that the seller paid $10,000 in closing costs for the buyer. Well, that's a concession that the seller made to try to help the buyer. Y'all, that's an adjustment you're going to have to make. Y'all, because the assumption is, again, not that everybody's going to agree with it, but it's still the assumption we have to make, is if the seller agreed to pay $10,000 in closing costs for the buyer, then the assumption is they increase the price of the house by $10,000 to offset that number. So in reality, even though it sold for $275,000, the house isn't worth that. It's only worth $265,000 because of the seller concessions, right? So all of a sudden that makes a big difference. We're actually dealing with a house that sold for $265,000 after you adjust for those concessions, versus the house that maybe sold for $265,000, but there were no concessions. So now we know $265,000 is the better number to go with. And if you're just going with the $275,000, then you're going to be overpriced because you didn't make the right adjustments. I know I'm throwing a lot at you right now. Don't get too nervous. Don't get on your pins and needles right at the moment. Nope, you don't need to do that. The point I'm trying to make to you and stress to you, with this approach to value, you've got to know what adjustments have to be made. If you're just going to take what the comp sold for and just go with that, you might as well just stop. Just stop. Now let's talk about that real quick. Look, you're not assuming you're not an appraiser, then you're not an appraiser, right? Don't try to act like an appraiser. I will tell you, there are property, especially in today's market because of the inventory. There are a lot of reasons for it, and I'm not going to get into all that right now. But I will tell you, there are a lot of houses that need to be appraised, or we're trying to put a value on it, whether because they're trying to sell it or because it's under contract and the lender wants it appraised. There's just a lot of houses that need an appraisal, and there are no good comps. Now, what does that mean? What do you mean there are no good comps? A good comp is one that would require very little, and best case scenario would be one that required no adjustments because they are so similar, there really aren't any adjustments to make. But I'm going to tell you that is very rare in today's market. Unfortunately, we're going to require a lot of adjustments. Now look, if as a real estate agent, if you have good comps, at least 3, 4 or 5, maybe even better. But you got to have at least 3 typically. Y'all, and you can find three good comps, meaning very little adjustments are required. Then, y'all, there's no reason as a real estate agent you can't do a simple market analysis and come and determine what we should be able to sell this house for. But if you wind up with one of these properties that's unique, makes it much different than other properties around them, and I'm telling you that's common. And y'all, quite frankly, sometimes it doesn't even have to be a unique property. It's just because there's nothing selling in this area. Nothing selling. So there is nothing that has recently sold. Y'all, at some point, y'all, you've got to come to realization this is beyond my capacity here as a real estate agent. I need help. Y'all, and there's nothing wrong with that. Y'all, because at some point, you're no longer doing a market analysis. You're just guessing on what you think something is worth. Y'all, there is too much money at stake for anybody to be guessing on what something is worth or what the value might be. Y'all, please don't do that. You're going to get yourself in trouble, and you could cause a lot of financial loss or damage to your clients. Okay? So when it comes to these valuations, just, again, if you got the good comps, very few, if any, adjustments, there's no reason you can't do what we're about to go over. But if it looks like this is going to require a lot of adjustments, and I'm not sure how much to adjust for each one of these line items, then y'all, what might be a good idea at this point? Y'all, get it appraised. Get it appraised. Y'all, tell the seller. Just say, hey, look, seller, I have researched the market looking for comparable properties, some that would be similar to yours, and there are none. Or might be one, but I need at least three to have a good analysis. And there's just not three very good comparable properties that I would feel comfortable with, seller. So I would recommend at this point, let's just get the house appraised. Y'all, obviously what it costs to appraise is going to vary, certainly from market to market and certainly from state to state. But y'all, just for example, y'all, let's say it would cost, say, $400, maybe $500 to do what I would call a pre-listing appraisal. Y'all, meaning we just need to get it appraised so we know how much we can put it on the market for, right? Well, say you paid $400 for that appraisal versus if you decided to just estimate what you think the house is worth. Y'all, what's the chances you're going to be off by more than $400? Either too high or too low. Y'all, there's no doubt. In fact, I would be willing to bet you're going to be thousands, if not tens of thousands of dollars off when you start estimating or guessing on what the valuation might come out as. Why not just spend $400 up front, get a professional appraiser to come in and appraise the property? Y'all, now we know what it's worth. And y'all, I'm just telling you, that's going to be a $400 or maybe even $500 fee that both you and that seller will be glad you made. Okay? Y'all say, based on your best analysis, you firmly believe the house is worth $200,000 and that's what we should sell it for. But what if we find out later you could have sold it for $210,000 easily, or even $205,000? All right. Well, if it would have sold for $205,000, that's still only $5,000. But let me ask you this: would you be willing to spend $400 up front to make an additional $5,000? I would. I'd do it 3 or 4 times today if I could. Y'all, it's a no-brainer. So y'all, sometimes the cost of something can actually make you more money in the long run. So look, not every time am I suggesting you're going to need an appraisal when you're listing a house. But don't be concerned or scared of getting it appraised if you need to, right? Again, we're not appraisers, or at least most of you are not. So don't try to act like one. Okay, I've done enough preaching there for the moment. Now let's look, excuse me. Y'all, let's look at how these adjustments would work. Y'all, how do we make adjustments? Y'all, what I'm showing you right now on the slide, this is not even in your book. I just want to show you something here. And what you're looking at on the slide, again, for those of you still looking in the book trying to find it, it's not there. It's not in your book. I do have something similar to this in the book, but this is not in the book. So y'all just look at the slide here right now. Y'all, and looking on the left-hand side, y'all, that's the subject property I'm trying to figure out a value for. And my subject property, I know, has 3 bedrooms, it has 2 bathrooms, and there's 1,400 square feet. But then I've researched the market, and I have found 3 similar comps, comparables, that have recently sold. Y'all, comp 1, comp 2, and comp 3. And then you can see what the comps have versus the subject, along with what those comps actually sold for. Okay? Now, y'all, what I'm getting ready to show you here, y'all, this is all you need to worry about for exam purposes. Okay? And that's all we're trying to get you through right now. We just want to get you through the state exam. You will have to know how to make adjustments. Now, here's the good news. Y'all, for example, y'all, if you're looking again on the slide, the subject property versus just comp 1. Don't worry about 2 or 3. Are there any differences between the subject property and comp number 1, comparable 1? It looks like the only difference is the square footage, and it appears to be 25 square feet. Now, I will tell you, for in real life, y'all, that 25 feet is not even enough to worry about. Okay, so that wouldn't even matter at all. But for test purposes, y'all, we're going to worry about it. Y'all, we have to know how to adjust for it. So the first question is, y'all, if we got to make an adjustment for the square footage difference, we know there's 25 feet difference. Well, what's the value of that 25 feet? Now, I'll tell you what a lot of people will do, y'all, especially real estate agents, and some of you are already got your calculators out doing this. Might as well stop. Might as well go ahead and stop now. But we'll take the sales price of comp 1, which was $115,000, divide that by the square footage, the 1,425, and we come up with the price per square foot. You can't make adjustments based on that. Again, I'm not going to get into the weeds with you, but y'all, that's the price per foot. Y'all, we're dealing with value. Y'all, that's just different. Y'all, I'm not going to get in any deeper than that because it's not necessary. And the reason it's not, because on the state exam, y'all, if there's a difference in square footage, they will tell you in the question how much to value each foot by. Okay, each foot's worth X amount. Same thing, y'all, if there's a difference in bathrooms, y'all, they'll tell you in the question what the value of these differences are. So you're not going to have to try to figure out, well, how much are these different things worth? What's the value of all these different things I have to adjust for? Y'all, they're going to provide you that information in the question. Now, obviously, y'all, these are not realistic numbers, okay? They just want to make sure you know what to do with the number once you know what they are, I guess. But anyway, so y'all don't get too uptight. Y'all, so I'm going to tell you what the value of certain things are for this exercise. I'm just going to make up a number, basically. And don't get bent out of shape. Oh, well, it should be worth a lot more than that, or isn't not worth anywhere near that. Y'all don't get caught up in that. That's all irrelevant and doesn't matter for what we're doing here. We're just trying to get through the exam, okay? So, y'all, I'm just going to tell you, obviously, we have to make adjustments. And for valuation purposes and for this example, y'all, we're going to use $30 per foot as the value that we need to adjust. $30 per foot. I know somebody think, well, how in the world did you come up with that? I made it up, okay? It's a made up number, which is exactly what they're going to do to you on the state exam. So don't worry about where did the $30 come from. How do you determine it? I just made it up. So we know there's 25 feet difference between the subject and comp number 1. 25 feet times $30 a foot, how much does that give you? Y'all, if you got y'all, if you don't have a calculator, go get one. Y'all pause the video. Y'all, you're going to need your calculators for a good bit here, or at least for a while. Now, so what's $30 a foot times 25 feet? And hopefully your calculator told you it was $750. So y'all, that means we're going to have to make an adjustment of $750 for square footage. Y'all, the difference in square foot. So we know comp 1 sold for $115,000. So now I'm either going to have to add $750 to that sales price or subtract $750 from that sales price. Right? Y'all, this is what you got to know how to do for test purposes. How do you know whether to add it or to subtract it from that sales price? Well, y'all, here's the rule of thumb. And if you need to write this down, what I'm about to tell you, write this down. In fact, I would highly recommend you write this down. Y'all, here's the rule of thumb when you're trying to figure out whether to add or subtract. And I'm telling you, if you're not being careful here, you will add when you should have subtracted, and vice versa. Y'all, appraisers make that mistake a lot. Especially if you're getting in a hurry and you're not really thinking your way through it. Y'all, I'm telling you, you're going to add when you should have subtracted, or vice versa. And see, on the exam, y'all, I'm going to tell you, y'all say you should have subtracted, but yet you added and made it $115,750. Y'all, if you added it, well, I promise you that will be one of your options in the multiple choice question, even though it will be wrong because you shouldn't have added, you should have subtracted, right? So anyway, how do we know which one to do? Y'all, here's the rule of thumb. Y'all, if the comparable property has more of anything than the subject, then you must subtract. If the comparable property has less than the subject, then you must add. So I'm going to say that one more time. Hopefully you wrote this down. If the comparable, y'all, and this is critical here, I'm not talking about the subject. We're talking about the comparable. If the comparable property has more than the subject, then you must subtract. But if the comparable has less than the subject, then you must add. Okay? Y'all, you're only adjusting the comparable property. Y'all, you never adjust the subject to the comps. We're adjusting the comps to the subject. So, we know that 25 feet is worth $750, but hopefully you're able now to figure out, do I add $750 or subtract $750? Well, obviously, comp 1 has more square footage than the subject, so we must subtract. So the first adjustment we're going to make is a subtraction of $750. Y'all, that's the first adjustment. Well, since we're dealing with square footage, y'all, let's just stick with the square footage. and go over to comp number 2. Y'all, again, we're just looking at comp 2. And we're only looking at the square footage of comp 2. And again, so now we're comparing comp 2 to the subject. Well, what's the difference in square footage between comp 2 and the subject? Well, again, 25 feet. And we know we're using $30 a foot, so we know 25 feet times $30 a foot, again, is $750. But now, am I adding this to comp 2 or am I subtracting from comp 2? Well, obviously, because comp 2 has less than the subject, then I must add. So I'm going to add $750 to comp 2 sales price. All right, now let's go to our third comp. And again, we're just worrying about dealing with square footage. What's the difference in square footage between comp 3 and the subject? Now it's a little bit of a difference here. There's 75 feet difference. Now, again, if we're using the $30 per foot for value, then what's the $30 times 75 feet? Hopefully your calculator, I think, would give you $2,250, $2,250. So I know that's the adjustment I got to make, but am I going to add that or am I going to subtract it? Well, comp 3 has more than the subject, so I must subtract. So for comp 3, I'm going to subtract $2,250. Okay? So now we know what the adjustments are, at least for the square footage part of it. Now, let's go back to comp 1. Are there any other differences between comp 1 and the subject property? No. Those are all those other two. Same number of bedrooms, same number of bathrooms. So there are no other adjustments that need to be made to comp 1. So now let's go to comp 2. Any other differences between comp 2 and subject? And obviously, I think you see there's a half bath difference. Bedrooms are the same, but comp 2 has 1.5 baths. The subject has 2 baths. Well, how much is a half bath worth? Well, y'all, again, I'm just making up a number. It is should not be considered a realistic number, nor will it be whatever they give you to use on the state exam. They will just give you a number and you got to go with it. Well, the number I'm going to give you is $1,500. We're going to say a half bath is worth $1,500. All right, so then do I add that to comp 2 or do I subtract it? Well, comp 2 has less bathrooms than the subject, so I must add. So for comp 2, I'm going to add an additional $1,500 for that extra, for the extra half bath. And then they still got the same number of bedrooms, so there's no other adjustments we got to make to comp 2. But then if I go over to comp 3, again, we got a half bath difference, but this time, comp 3 has more bathrooms than the subject. And again, we know a half bath, we've already said, is $1,500. And because comp 3 has more than the subject, then we must subtract. So I'm going to subtract $1,500 from comp 3. All right, so now once you've got to this point, you now know what adjustments need to be made to each of the comparable properties. Then you need to take the sales price of each comp and then either add or subtract whatever the adjustments are. And I'll go ahead and just throw them out there. And there you see what the adjusted sales prices are. Okay. So in this example, there's really not a huge difference between the actual sales price. For example, comp 1, it actually sold for $115,000. But after adjustments, we're only looking at 114,250, which is not that big a difference. Even probably the biggest difference, if you look at comp 3, it actually sold for 120,000, but after making the adjustments, then we're working with the 116,250. So a little bit of difference there, but still, there's not a great big difference between the adjusted sales price and the actual sales price. But here's what you need to understand here. I tried to make this as simple as I could possibly make it. And the reason I'm doing that is, again, for test purposes. All you're going to have to know how to do is to, do you add or subtract? Again, they will tell you what the value of the differences are. They'll provide that information to you in the question. Basically, you just have to know, do I add it or do I subtract it from that sales price? And what the question's going to be, for example, might be, what's the adjusted sales price for comp number 2 or comp number 3 or whatever? So really, the only thing you're doing is making sure you add or subtract the way you should have. Okay? That's all you're going to have to do for test purposes. But what about real world purposes? Obviously, when you get out there in the real world and you're actually dealing with sellers and we're trying to figure out what the value of their property is, you're not going to have anything that tells you what a half bath is worth or what a full bath is worth or what the value of the square footage is. That's where you're going to have to, you're just going to have to learn through experience. Hopefully there'll be somebody like your broker, whoever you're working for, would be willing to help you with this, help train you up on some of this stuff. And there's no way I can tell you realistically what a bath is worth, because I'm going to tell you that's going to vary from one property to the next. Just for example, just so you understand what I'm saying, because a lot of people will ask me, well, Frank, just give me an estimate. What would be the value of a full bath? If it was 2 bathrooms versus 3 full bathrooms. What's the value there? Well, there's no written down, there's nothing in writing that says it's worth any specific amount. You can't do it that way. Because if you've got a $200,000 house, the overall value is $200,000. The value of a bathroom in that house is not going to be the same of what a bathroom would be worth in a $800,000 house. Right? So you can't say just a bathroom's worth $5,000. No, it depends on the property. It might be worth $5,000 in a $200,000 home, but it's going to be worth a whole lot more than that in an $800,000 home. So there's no way to just say bathrooms are this, a fireplace is worth that. It depends on there's just a lot of variables that go into this. Again, but with experience, you can get pretty good at it. But at the end of the day, if you're not comfortable making adjustments, what might be the best option for you? We talked about it earlier. Just get it appraised. But see, here's what you'll get. Here's what else you're going to get out of that appraisal. One, now you've got an actual appraisal that says here's what it's worth. So nobody can dispute it or argue with you now. But the other thing it does, if you take that appraisal and study, you'll be the appraiser, whatever adjustments they make, it will be, you can see it in the appraisal. They got to show all that. There'll be a grid with all the differences listed here. And you can see how much they adjusted. So, I'm telling you, you look at enough appraisals, you start to get a good feel or idea of how much they're valuing the differences of different things. That's where the experience is going to come from. But the other thing I wanted to point out to you here, y'all, because what I just showed you on this slide, again, because it's just very little information on this slide, because I just wanted to keep this very simple to show you how to either add or subtract. But I'm just telling you, in reality, you're going to have a lot more than three things. You're going to be dealing with a lot more than just the bedroom, bathroom, and square footage. It's a lot more things you're going to wind up having to adjust for. But I will tell you one major item, and this is where I'm telling you where most agents are really causing themselves some problems, is condition. You could have a subject property and a comparable property nearby that recently sold, and they are pretty close to identical in terms of the amenities. They're just really close, real close in square footage, same bathrooms, same bed, everything else is almost identical. But what about condition? You could have one homeowner, maybe the property that recently sold, the comparable, that homeowner was just really meticulous about maintaining, fixing things. It's just in really good condition. And maybe they've just recently updated their kitchen. They updated their bathrooms. They put in new flooring, new paint, new roof. Just any number of things. They could have done a lot of work to that house. But that subject property you're getting ready to list, even though there are a lot of things that are almost identical to that comp, condition-wise, it may not even be close. Because maybe it's a 15-year-old home. Say it was built 15 years ago, just like the comp was. But your subject, they haven't done anything to that house since they bought it. Nothing. You could have $50,000, $70,000, $100,000 difference. You could actually have to make an adjustment of $50,000 to $75,000 just for condition. So again, on this slide, the little bit of stuff we're looking at here, that's why it doesn't look like that big a deal between the sales price and the adjusted price. But I'm just telling you, in the real world, you could have $20,000, $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 difference between the actual sales price versus what you need to be considering as the adjusted sales price. Right? So I'm not telling you all that stuff to scare you, but I am telling you, again, there is no room for guessing, estimating, or guesstimating when it comes to doing your market analysis. If you've got good comps that require very little adjustments, condition is relatively the same, there's no reason you shouldn't be able to do this. So just looking at this example again on the slide, we know we've got a range of value from around 111, if you're looking at the adjusted sales prices, then we know this house should be worth somewhere between $111,000 and say $116,000. Again, that's a very small range. In reality, that range is going to be a good bit bigger than that. You may wind up with somewhere, say, between $190,000 and $240,000. You could have a pretty big range between the comp that sold for the least amount versus the comp that sold for the most amount. So what we know is the subject property should be worth something somewhere in between that range, between the low side and the high side. Well, the question you got to figure out now, we'll just use this example. Do I want to list this house for $111,000 again, looking at the slide, or $116,000? Honestly, if I'm the listing agent, I'm okay anywhere in that range. For the most part, assuming we've made good adjustments. So, but some things you might want to consider, seller, and y'all not let seller, obviously the seller say, well, no, I want the 116. I want the highest. Okay, well, and that's fine if that's what you want, seller, but didn't you tell me you need to sell now? You don't have time for the house to sit around on the market. You got to get it sold because you're moving out of here or relocating or whatever. Well, yeah, that's true. And I said, well, then maybe we don't want to go for the high side. Maybe we want to get closer to the lower end, or certainly maybe even the middle. Y'all, there's just a lot of things to consider when you're trying to figure out what we need to list it for. But whatever you agree on, y'all, it should be in the range that we just looked at here. Okay? You start agreeing to list it out over the high part of the range, y'all, it's not going to sell. Y'all, you've overpriced it. Not going to happen more times than not anyway. So, y'all, again, now in your book, y'all, you see something very similar here. Y'all, it's just a lot more information, and y'all, you can kind of look over that, read over it. But it's really some of the same stuff. But here's what I need you to know for sales comparison approach for test purposes. Do I add or do I subtract? Again, you don't need to get caught up on what certain things are worth, because nobody, not even this state exam, y'all, nobody expects you to know at this stage how to determine the value of certain components within the house. So they'll provide that information again, but they'll be made up numbers. Don't get your light and say, well, I remember on the state exam, they said a full bath was worth $2,500. Y'all, you try to use that in the real world, you're going to have problems. Y'all, these are made up numbers. Okay. We're just trying to make sure you know whether to add it or subtract it when you're adjusting that comparable sales price. Okay. All righty. Y'all, in the next hour, we're going to talk about the income approach to value. So y'all make sure you have your calculators for that. Y'all, that's going to be a lot of fun.